Trials by ordeal actually did take place in the ancient Middle East. We know them best from Babylonia, which would be southern Mesopotamia, and Assyria, which would be northern Mesopotamia. We think they occurred in both places. The one ordeal that we know of best is what we call the river ordeal. So someone might be on trial for a serious wrong of some kind, and the judges might not be sure whether the defendant is innocent or guilty. So in that case, they might do a number of things, but one of the things they could do was to ask the defendant to undergo the river ordeal. They would take the defendant down to the edge of a river. If there was a famous river close by, like the river Euphrates, they would take the defendant there. And they would have the defendant enter the water. If the defendant were to sink into the water, that would be a sign of guilt. If the defendant were to float, it seems to be that that would be a sign of innocence. But is that all there was to it? It seems to be the case that the defendant had to make it across the river, or at least to a certain point in the river, before sinking. And it's possible they had to actually carry a weight or a stone with them to make it harder. Now, some scholars have said, well, if they're guilty, they're going to sink and die. They'll drown. But that doesn't seem to be how the river ordeal operated. If you couldn't make it across and you started to sink, they would deem you guilty, but then they would haul you out of the water and punish you in some other way. So we know of cases where someone didn't pass the river ordeal. They were gotten out of the river alive, and then they had to turn over a certain amount of property, in some cases all the land they owed, but they didn't lose their life in the river ordeal. There's another text that's a literary text that describes a river ordeal, and it says the person sank, so they must have been guilty, but then they don't reappear again. No one knows what happened to them. A little bit later, that same day, they find the body downriver, washed ashore. And when they examine the body in this story, it's not dead from drowning. It was dead from being burned. Now, how do you end up being burned in a river? The story says that the person sank and the river god put them to death through burning, not through drowning. So in a sense, it's a kind of supernatural death that they believed the person experienced. Apart from the river ordeal, we're not sure if there were other ordeals like walking on hot coals or something, but there may have been some kind of drinking ordeal. There are some texts from Mesopotamia that suggest this, but they're not entirely clear. There is a text in the Bible, though, in the book of Numbers, where there seems to be a drinking ordeal. If a husband suspects his wife of adultery, but he's not sure if she committed it, and he doesn't have any good evidence, he can bring her to the priest of their shrine, and the priest will write down an oath, and the oath will say something like, "If I have committed adultery, may I be punished." He writes those words down on something. We don't know exactly on what. And then the text says he'll scrape those words off into a cup of water. And then he also adds to the water some dust from the floor of the shrine. He mixes all this together, and he has the woman drink the water. She drinks the water, and she also has to listen to the priest recite the oath, again, which says, "If I committed adultery, may I be punished." And then she has to say the Hebrew word amen, which comes over into English eventually as the word amen or amen, which means, may this be the case. So if I have committed adultery, she's giving assent to having herself punished. Some people don't think it's a drinking ordeal as such. It may just be an oath ritual. But she does have to drink this rather odd potion, and it says that her abdomen will swell and she will not be able to give birth if she's guilty. She may become infertile. If she's innocent, it says she'll be fine and she'll be able to give birth in a normal way. So this could be our one example of a drinking ritual that may confirm some of the other texts from elsewhere in the ancient Middle East that suggest there may have been drinking rituals there as well.